What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. This is a remarkably even metagame, with advantages being found day by day, so I think it's best to start with the decks that are being played highly, and this Thanos list is probably the sort of metagame baseline that people are going to have to be extremely prepared to face when they play Marvel Snap. Part of that is my fault. I did a video on it and people started playing it a lot more. That does happen, but this is also just a very powerful list that has Goliath in it, so people will be able to do their weekend missions with it, so you're going to see it even more than normal. And just baseline, it's a very strong list. And while I think this might not be the exact strongest deck in the metagame, it's impossible to talk about the other developments that have occurred without talking about Thanos, because they all happen in the shadow of Thanos. When we talk about Clog decks, that is a reaction to this deck's popularity. When we talk about the way in which Afflict decks have adapted to having a Super Skrull be a potential threat, that is a reaction to this deck's popularity, among others. When we talk about the ways in which other decks have shifted to accommodate things like Killmonger and Lady Deathstrike, that is again due to this. So this is, I would say, probably the most influential deck in the metagame right now because of what it is causing everyone else to do. This is a baseline powerful deck, and the combination of Cosmo and Super Skrull mean that you're very rarely actually out of it in any sense of the word. Cosmo and Super Skrull are not the typical tech choices for a normal Thanos deck, but this isn't a normal Thanos deck. And you will be able to really scam people with those tech choices because of how binary they are, and because they're not necessarily the most expected cards. This is a deck that outputs massive amounts of points. It can fill up locations that it's not even at anymore, thanks to things like Space Stone Thanos, thanks to the fact that Sam Wilson's shield can move, thanks to the fact that it runs cards like Blue Marvel and Spectrum. A large amount of flexibility, relevant tech for the metagame, and powerful, powerful cards. You noticed that I mentioned the adaptations being made by Afflict decks. This is one of those adaptations. If a lot of people are going to be playing Super Skrull, because there are a lot of Goliath and or Captain Carter ongoing decks in the metagame, you can't reasonably be a Luke Cage gamer if you are playing an Afflict deck. More on that later, because I think it's maybe a little bit overstated, but this is a really cool way to try to react to a metagame full of just Thanos ongoing stuff, because you're going to be putting them in a frickin' blender. This is a deck that is extremely good into Thanos ongoing. It's quite good into a variety of things, and it has a very, very powerful final turn. And since it doesn't involve Luke Cage, you have a lot of bully snaps where you don't really have to worry about your opponent being able to Super Skrull your Luke Cage, because you literally don't run him. Now, downside. It does mean you're in a pretty awkward spot against anyone who actually does play Luke Cage, but there is some advantage that you can gain, because if they play Luke Cage on turn 5 to prevent your Abomination High Evo, then you might be able to Red Guardian it if they don't properly protect it. If they play Luke Cage on turn 6 to catch you by surprise, you're probably getting some very cheap dudes in the form of that giant Abomination, maybe a Miles Morales, and who knows, maybe also an Ajax. One alt here is that I have personally been playing just normal Ajax, in part because there are a lot of people playing the list we just talked about, and I figure I'll just not play my Luke Cage in the matchups where I'm worried about a Super Skrull. Like, that's sort of how I'm approaching this, or just like, look, yeah, we can go out of our way and just not run Luke Cage, but what if we were running Luke Cage, and because we ran Luke Cage, we beat all the people who were playing Afflict without Luke Cage, and then we also beat all the people who Afflict just sort of naturally beats, like the Thanos stuff, other big deck type of builds. Those are the good matchups here, and I think leaning back into that is a very reasonable thing to do. I will say, even though I had the other build first, I think it is a more relevant build for the right now. But if you were to ask me which of these is the long-term investment play, I would guess that it is still this. There's a very specific metagame reaction that is causing people to move towards the other build. That is not a consistent state of affairs. The factors that are causing that, things like a lack of Mobius and Mobius, a very high presence of Super Skrull, a very high presence of Thanos decks, those are factors that are very easily changeable. Whereas this deck has been consistently good, and I think actually is a little bit better right now, too. So, we've discussed a little bit about the influence of Thanos on the Afflict deck. That same influence can be shown on the Scream deck. While I do think the normal Scream deck is perfectly playable, I suspect that this build is a little bit better into what you're likely to see right now. In part, that is because Killmonger just absolutely takes Thanos apart right now. Thanos is a deck that wants to play out all of those things, buff them up with a Blue Marvel, buff them up with a Spectrum, use them to play a free Mockingbird. Killmonger takes them behind the woodshed. It's unbelievably powerful. You also have access to Lady Deathstrike, the other way of triggering Uncle Ben, and because of that, Lady Deathstrike is also a relevant tech card into a variety of those ongoing decks as well. And it can even be very powerful into cards like Bullseye out of the discard matchup. What this means is that this deck has a much more even matchup spread than the traditional Scream deck, which can get a little bit bogged down in being a dedicated mid-range deck and not necessarily having answers for the decks that are able to meaningfully go over the top of it, which both Discard and Thanos right now are able to do. So because of that, I think this build is the right one for Scream at the moment right now. And that is a very good thing for this archetype, that it is able to adapt in this way and get that relevant tech into this metagame. One of the things that's been happening recently in High Infinite is people experimenting with what I think you would reasonably call Agamotto-less Agamotto decks. These are sort of tech-heavy Juggernaut and tech cards, Zabu-style decks. I'm going to show you a couple different builds of these kind of decks. This is the one that I have personally enjoyed the most, in part because it gives me an actual avenue to play Mr. Sinister and have him actually be good for maybe the first time ever, but also because if you take priority with something like this, you will be able to leave things behind. There is one sort of debated slot here, and that is the Iron Patriot versus Captain Marvel slot. That is very much a flex slot. If you don't own Iron Patriot, Captain Marvel can absolutely go in here. This is, like many other decks in this metagame, a deck that really accelerates itself when you have Zabu. I've started to notice a very concerning amount of Zabu and Fours packages at this point, where it's like, I don't know what his stats are, but I really kind of wonder if that guy might be in line for a balance change with the amount of him that I see. It's Sam Wilson level, maybe higher, honestly. AndreVar has been playing a similar list. One thing I especially want to highlight here is Loki, which is a very reasonable card right now, but not necessarily one that is as good as you think. There are certain matchups where this card is amazing. Loki into an Afflict deck that is running Luke Cage is a really powerful thing to do. Even Loki into an Afflict deck that isn't running Luke Cage leaves you pretty liable to get things like Ajax out of their deck for cheaper. Any kind of deck that is playing cards that are good against itself is going to be in a really good spot. Loki is great into Thanos. Loki is great into Arishem. There's just kind of a lot of room for this card to exist right now, and that is a very reasonable starting point for when you're messing around with these sort of generic good stuff lists. I mean, you could also just play the Seasoned Passler. I feel like everyone's just sort of forgotten that this deck is good. It's totally fine. Like, this is a 100% playable, 100% acceptable deck. I would say that Agamotto is one of the most well-designed Season Pass cards that Marvel Snap has ever released. I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but I definitely believe it. It's actually crazy to me that they nailed the balance on a card that wacky. The first time they introduced skills, there's some getting shuffled into your deck at different costs, and they got it exactly right. The card is powerful without being overpowered. It's a unique play experience that adds texture to the game. I don't know how they did it, frankly. Like, when you look at the release of Arishem and the release of Agamotto, they're not too different, and they were night and day in terms of how dialed in the balance team was. It is an amazing job they did there. It's sort of literally impossible for this deck to ever actually be bad. Scornhub.com, the classic, it's basically just been here forever. Like, this is just, since Bullseye came out, this has been a deck, and it has looked like this, and people have played it, and it has done what it has done. This is a powerful list that, in my opinion, sort of outperforms the other discard lists. I've seen a couple people at High Infinite try to use the Colleen Wing slot as a tech slot or the Meek slot as a tech slot. It is possible as long as you're looking at a proactive piece of tech like a Mobius and Mobius, and not a reactive piece of tech like a Shang-Chi or an Enchantress. This is a very, very strong deck, and I feel like it's just sort of consistently been good and will continue to consistently be good. Like, if you wanted to one-trick a deck, this is a great choice if you plan to one-trick something. The Khonshu build definitely is an alt build here. I strongly suspect that the classic Scorn Hub build is just a little bit better, not overwhelmingly so. Like, there are, in my opinion, genuinely two pretty good discard decks. I just think one of them is a little bit better than the other, but that's not to say that this is a bad deck or a bad choice by any means. It's just not the primary within its own archetype. It is powerful, albeit vulnerable to Red Guardian on your Dracula. There are cool things that you can do, but you're a little bit less consistent at making sure that they actually happen, and your ceiling is a little bit lower, but it is very cool. Like, this is a deck that I love that it is a thing that can exist again, because of the coolness of Apocalypse and the nature of this kind of deck. I'm glad that Khonshu was able to find a real home here. When I talked about the power of things like Lady Deathstrike and Killmonger, I talked about them mostly proactively, but one other upside to having those cards in your deck, to using them instead of Enchantress to try to deal with the current metagame, is this deck. Because Clog is just ruthless. It's not like you're gonna win a lot of cubes, but if you stack up enough game wins at 1 and 2 cubes, you're gonna be in a really dominant position. This is a deck that has a ton of good matchups right now. It is extremely consistent at making sure what it needs to happen does happen. There are not an overwhelming amount of people who are able to counterplay magic in this metagame, especially because as a Clog deck, you are extremely often able to magic a lane that is full, and that means that something like Reality Stone out of Thanos won't do the job. It's pretty much just Legion a lot of the time, and there aren't too many of those running around, and the ones that are usually pretty clearly telegraphed in that you are playing against an Arishem deck, which is not the only possible deck to run Legion, but it's the only one you're reasonably expecting it out of. And so you have a deck that just has a reasonable spot in the metagame, and a very powerful one. The thing you'd want to watch out for here is that while this deck is good, in my opinion, great even against Thanos stuff, if more people start picking up on the Killmonger anti-Thanos direction as opposed to the Afflict anti-Thanos direction, you might be in a little bit of trouble, because this deck does not handle Lady Deathstrike and Killmonger very well. Arishem is still tooling around. With the sample size that I have of since the release of the new cards on Tuesday, I don't think I would trust anyone who says they know for sure what the best Arishem list is. It is very up in the air. I'm not even sure if the best Arishem list is an Arishem Thanos list or a non-Arishem Thanos list. There's so much going on. What I can tell you is that no matter what it is you are doing, you probably want Loki in your Arishem deck because I'm seeing a whole lot of Cassandra Nova. Another thing pushing against playing a deck like this is unfortunately the Afflict matchup, in as much as it exists, which is very prominent at high ranks, but I don't know if it's percolated downwards yet. So if you're not seeing a lot of Afflict, this is like a much more acceptable thing to do. But Afflict stuff is really hard to deal with because of the way it can compete on points without actually being very vulnerable to Goliath a lot of the time. Oh, and by the way, it also runs Cassandra Nova. The interplay between the three cards that add cards to your deck, Thanos, Agamott-NO, and of course Arishem, has always been kind of fascinating to me, because I think at a certain point you're just like, screw it, I'll just run them all. And so there's a lot of different combinations of the three that you can make. I think that this version of Thanos is getting a little bit overlooked. There is something to be said for this kind of build right now, although it might be a little more relevant if you like just slammed an Enchantress in here instead of the Red Guardian. It's a little hard to do if you're going to be a Wiccan deck. There are decisions that you have to make to update this deck to the metagame basically every day. Like, there's just a lot that you're going to have to think about and react to when you play the non-ongoing Thanos list, because in my opinion, the power level here is lower in terms of the numbers you're going to get per game, but you do make up for it in the sense that you are not nearly as all in on your Thanos stones as a ongoing version of the deck is. The ongoing version of the deck really folds to Killmonger. It is really bad. It cares so much about those stones being on the board. This deck's like, okay, I got Killmongered, but I could like play around that by getting my Mockingbird down early anyway. It's fine. It's whatever. That's okay. You are going to be a little more consistent, but you're giving up some of the really high highs. I believe this is SMLZ's build of Surfer. It's actually pronounced Smiles, who knew? But this is a very acceptable deck that I sort of struggle to see what is necessarily fully appealing about it. Again, this is another deck that if you want to, can be a Killmonger deck if you want to beat Thanos, can be a bunch of stuff. The flex spot here is absolutely Sage. You can also flex one of the twos out and get a Nova in here if you feel like it. The point I'm trying to make is that the basic shape of Surfer has not really changed. You are playing some guys, and then you are making those guys bigger. And then Galacta is going to make them even bigger. This is a perfectly cromulent game plan from a perfectly cromulent deck. There is absolutely nothing wrong with playing Surfer. It is a very, very solid choice. Speaking of very solid choices, I think Mr. Negative is actually pretty severely underrated right now. There are basically no Mobiuses in this game. People just aren't playing that. And whenever people aren't playing Mobius, Mr. Negative is going to be a very good choice. This is a powerful list that has immense bully snap potential, where you have access to a turn 3 Mr. Negative or a turn 4 negative into Jane. These are plays that are going to beat basically everybody. It is very much in your hands when you play this deck. So, you know, that's a double-edged sword. If you feel like you're getting unlucky all the time, not a great deck to cope with. You can cope, but this is not a deck that is built to cope stay. This is a deck that is built to bully people out for cube rate, and that is how you're going to have to play it, in my humble opinion. The deck is powerful. It is extremely, extremely heavy on points once you have activated your combo, and you should be snapping early into this, because there are very few things that are going to beat you after it happens. Ema has been popularizing a version of this list that is honestly just a huge throwback, but it is thick as hell. And I think when I see a list like this is what sort of starts sending up warning signs for Zabu, because it's like, this is not an okay amount of 4-drops to run, unless you are a Zabu deck, and then it's like, all right, fine, I guess you can just do this, right? Like, I guess if you want like half your deck to be 4s and 5s, like, I guess you can just do it. It's fine. I struggle to play decks like this because you have like a few cards you actually want to play by turn 2. It's Sam Wilson, it's Kate Bishop. You're not super jazzed about playing Mysterio, but you will. And it's just like, this is such a heavy list. You have 1 3-drop, and so you're sitting there just looking at like, man, if I don't Zabu into this giant sentry, it's going to be very awkward. There are good things going on here, though. Like, I don't want to understate it, right? Like, it has metagame relevant tech. Enchantress is really important right now. You get to be able to output powerful things like a Mockingbird pretty early. That can be your 3-drop if you play Mysterio. You're gonna do that a decent amount of the time. You don't need to sandbag her. You can just play her. And so this is a deck that has a fairly straightforward game plan, but one of the major upsides is that right as Clog is seeing a bit of a renaissance, you have the ability to put them in the ground. Annihilus is borderline unbeatable in that matchup, and that's actually going to be a decent amount relevant. It's non-zero. This is another list that a lot of people have been playing. I feel like it's pretty aggressively medium. There's nothing wrong with it. Like, you look at it and it sort of checks all the boxes, right? You got Zabu, you got your Enchantress, you got your Gwenpool, you got your Galacta, you got the stuff, right? It's fine. Like, how bad can this be, right? Like, it's just like a perfectly at par deck where it's just like, here's a bunch of stuff. It's probably not the best Iron Patriot, Sam Wilson, Enchantress, Galacta, Gwenpool deck, but it does a couple of different things, and you can do cool stuff with it, and it's not the end of the world. And so, yeah, it's not the greatest deck of all time, but it is a very safe choice. If you're looking for a Captain Carter deck, I tried her in place of the Captain Marvel / Iron Patriot list when we talked about the Elsa version of the, not seasoned Passler, but the sort of generic good cards deck. I tried her there. I think she's probably just worse than either of them. This is sort of the one Captain Carter list where I'm like, okay, maybe there's actually something worth doing here. And once again, we are heavily reliant on Zabu. I lost to someone playing this list. They had a Sera, and then they just played 3 4-drops on the final turn of the game, and it was just like, wow, okay. When you Zabu Sera in the right order, it's a very powerful thing to do. The downside, I think, and this is worth talking about with Captain Carter, is that it's very hard to catch people by surprise. Obviously, there's a ton of Enchantress in this metagame. That's a problem already. There are people playing Super Skrull. That's not great, but the Enchantress stuff is what's really bothering you because it's very hard to play Captain Carter as a surprise because you need her to be in the front lines in order to actually get value. So the only way to play her as a surprise is if you're playing her and then also filling up a location 2, 3, 4. That's the only way to be surprising with her, and you can't do that without pretty massive cost reduction, which is what this deck is kind of going for. And the reason it's so bad that she can't be a surprise is Enchantress, right? Like, there's a lot of people playing Goliath decks, a lot of people playing Captain Carter decks, and because of that, Enchantress is sort of feasting, and you're never going to catch people off guard, because the way you dodge tech cards traditionally is throw priority and then play them on the final turn of the game, the things that would get blown up by the tech cards. You can't do that with Captain Carter because it's so hard to get value out of her if you try. Like, this is a card that is like, oh, okay, you know, it's cool or whatever, but it needs some specific stuff. And so it's very hard for it to dodge the tech that is very good into it. A lot of people are playing this. I don't think it stacks up. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, this was one of the decks that was in one of my early videos for, I think, Goliath and maybe for Captain Carter. It's early. Let me put the emphasis there. Like, this is a, like, wow, this is like, oh, he's kind of cool. You can play it day one. It is no longer day one. This is not a good deck right now. You can't do it. I would not advise trying this stuff right now. The Doom 2099 nerf was so meaningful that the point ceiling of this deck, I feel like in terms of ongoing tribal decks, this deck has been nearly totally supplanted by Thanos, and it has the same weaknesses and the same strengths, and Thanos is just doing it better. And so I cannot see a good reason to be playing this version of the ongoing thing, bar, I guess, you want to get the Captain Carter gold? I know what time it is. You know what time it is. It's destroy time, baby. Yes, as always, the end of the tier list, we have destroy. There is absolutely nothing new to say about this deck. I put it on here for the joke, and that is why it is still here. The deck is perfectly baseline acceptable. It is totally fine. I'm not going to be like, wow, destroy, this guy sucks. There are threatening things this deck can do. There's a lot of good locations for it. A Deadpool scaling up early is really good. This is a deck that can win games against anything. It's just probably not going to do that at above a 50% rate over a large enough sample size unless you're kind of massively skill diffing at the high end of Infinite. Maybe it's possible. I would guess it's probably a lot easier with a lot of other decks. I wanted to give a little bit of a last word, if you will, on like what I think of the metagame right now, because I think it's pretty solid, but it is sort of a little sparse, if that makes sense. There's a lot of decks, but a lot of them are like alternate builds of other decks, where it's like we haven't figured out exactly the best way to be a Juggernaut tech deck or whatever. And a lot of that is because of the pressure that the ongoing decks are putting on the metagame, and people are trying to react to that. Like right now, I would say like we have like Thanos Ongoing that exists, so how do we react to that? The Scream deck does it with the Killmonger stuff. You can do that in Surfer if you want as well. That makes you well positioned against Clog, which is another deck people are playing in order to try to beat Thanos. But at the same time, are you going to be well positioned into the Afflict decks, which are a different strategy that people are trying to play to beat Thanos, both in deck building and in gameplay? Deck building being the Afflict deck with the Abomination High Evo in it, and gameplay being the normal Afflict deck, and you just don't play your Luke Cage if you don't have to against a deck that can play Super Skrull against you. There's a lot going on. But I do think that it's worth also noting the sort of silent and continuous performance of stalwarts like Mr. Negative and Discard, which are just great decks to one trick, I feel like, although Mr. Negative probably a little bit less so than Discard. This is a pretty interesting metagame, and I am interested to see where it goes. I do feel, though, that it's a little centralized in a way I can't put my finger on, but there's just kind of a lot of good stuff piles going on right now, and that is never the greatest thing to experience. So, you know, I'm rooting for the Thanoses. I'm rooting for the Afflict decks. I'm not rooting for Clog, but like, theoretically, you know? As always, I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.